Russell and Eric Kuhn set the table very nicely, provided you with the background necessary for Andy Mueller, the Colorado River District's new general manager. I don't know how long we're going to continue to call you the new general manager. Maybe, Eric was there for 37 years, so perhaps that's the length we can continue to call you new. Demand management is admittedly the most controversial element. Imagine a controversial element to water management and operations. It's the most controversial element to that three-legged stool that Eric described of dealing with truly historically adverse hydrology. What do we do with low water levels, low water precipitation? To talk more about demand management and to begin a further conversation for the rest of the day about the need for, the importance of, and exactly what is demand management, please join me in welcoming Andy Mueller.
So I don't have all the books that Russ had. I apologize. As Chris said, I'm Andy Mueller. I'm the current general manager. We'll just go with that at the Colorado River District. I want to thank Eric for his 37 years of service. He clearly eats, breathes, and sleeps the Colorado River. It's in his bones, and he knows it well. And for a nuclear submarine engineer, he's done a remarkable job in water, and we really have benefited as the West Slope for having him as our manager, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Eric. I want to say, Chris's introduction, I will talk about demand management, but I think in order to talk first about what's in the cards for the Upper Basin, the state of Colorado, and the West Slope, we first have to emphasize what has gotten us to this point. And Eric touched on it, but I think that it's important to be really clear from the Upper Basin's perspective. There is a, quote, structural deficit in the Colorado River. It's in the lower basin, and it has to do with overuse. And that's what we really call it. They're using too much water in the lower basin. This is a slide on the left there from the Central Arizona project, and it addresses what they call the structural deficit, and it says they're using 9 million acre-feet of water a year down in the lower basin. But it fails to account for the approximately 1.3 million in additional evaporation from their reservoirs and transit loss in their system. So in reality, they're using vastly more than the 7.5 million that was allocated to them under the compact. Furthermore, the operation of the 2007 interim guidelines and the way they've been interpreted has led, since 2000, in the last 18 years, to an 11 million acre-foot surplus that's been delivered down to the lower basin. The 11 million acre-feet is above and beyond the 7.5 million per year that we're obligated to deliver or not deplete from the river down to the lower basin, and the half of the Mexican treaty obligation. So it's 11 million acre-feet above and beyond the 8.23 million that Eric was talking about. Just for matters of clarity, today Lake Powell has just about 10 million acre-feet sitting in it. If we hadn't delivered the extra 11 million, Lake Powell would be twice as full, more than twice as full. I'm a lawyer, so my math is not as accurate as Eric's, but I think it's really critical for all of us in this room and for everybody in the basin to realize that the primary driver here is the lower basin's overuse. In addition, however, we've got to recognize that we have a supply problem in the upper basin. That the hydrology that we've seen in the last 18 years and the warming of our climate is in fact a problem that is on our shoulders in the Upper Basin. Under that compact, under that delivery obligation, we do have an obligation to deliver that water. And I know the state's attorneys will parse that. Our own attorneys at the River District will probably parse that. But the reality is it's there. But even with the lower basin cutting back their use, which I have to say they're taking steps to do so, and we appreciate that. But the reality is that the studies show that climate change is going to reduce the inflow into Powell, the natural flow into Powell, by 20% by 2035. By the end of the century, 35%. And when you look at those numbers and you compare it to the inflow into Powell in a year like this, we've got to recognize that we in the Upper Basin do, in fact, have to act as well. So while the major driver is this overuse in the lower basin, climate change represents an issue for us. Well, I want to touch a little bit on the lower basin. Additionally, this whole idea of a demand management pool. Let's talk about that. Eric talks about a demand management program. It's an issue that is in our Upper Basin DCP, Drought Contingency Plan. And the idea is that we need a pool, whether it's solely in Powell or in the other CRISP reservoirs or even in privately owned state-operated reservoirs in Upper Basin states. We need that water to be invisible to tiering, invisible to this equalization criteria that has allowed the lower basin to suck that $11 million acre-feet of water down out of Powell. Why do we need that? We need it for reasons like this. This slide is produced by the Central Arizona Project. It shows exactly how they were gaming the system. This slide caused quite a controversy earlier this year when it appeared on their own webpage, and people from the Upper Basin happened to notice. It basically shows how if they time their orders for delivery from the Secretary out of Lake Mead, they can cause or trigger a 9 million acre-foot release instead of an 8.23 million acre-foot release at certain levels within the lake. What they were doing is saying, hey, we're gonna take as much water for ourselves as possible. The Upper Basin, the state of Colorado, and many players in the lower basin have pushed back against that. So it has not gone unaddressed. But on the Upper Basin, we do need to plan for the worst. We need to plan for terrible hydrology. We need to plan as if the hydrology we've had in the last 18 years will continue. And how do we do that, right? Well, the UCRC, which is the Upper Colorado River Commission. So I know probably 80% of the people in this room understand what that is, but let's just be, also I want to help explain that. It's a commission with one representative from each state in the upper division states. Our commissioner, James Eklund, is appointed by our governor. The other commissioners are either appointed by their governor or by their legislature or some other function. But the Upper Colorado River Commission has amazing authority under the Upper Colorado River Compact that was signed in 1948. So it is our commissioner who has the ability to enter into agreements with the other states regarding our demand management pool in Powell, regarding the reservoir reoperations, the things that we actually need to happen or have tools available to us in this toolbox to prevent a call. So when we talk about a demand management pool, the reason is this slide right here. It's for preventing lower basin entities from sucking too much water down that river. If we can talk about demand management, Eric correctly said, look, it's just it is an intentional reduction in the consumptive use. What does that mean for water users in the state of Colorado? It probably means less crop production. It means less food production. It means urban users facing drought restrictions in wetter years. It means potentially our industrial sector producing less power with water. It means less economic output from western and eastern Colorado. It is a serious step. It is contrary to how culturally and politically our state has operated since its founding. It is instead of the intentional use of water, it is the intentional non-use of water. This is a shift in our complete outlook in the water community. It's not something that people accept easily. It's not something that people should look at and say, gee, I'm totally on board. People need to understand it. It needs to see the light of day. It needs to be vetted in a very public and open process so that everybody in the community, everybody in the state can understand it and understand its implications to them and their communities. It is a tool which, frankly, the River District, our board, our staff endorses. It is one that makes sense. But in order for it ever to be rolled out within our state, it must be done in a way that has sideboards or rules that protect all regions of the state, that make sure that the pain that comes with reduced consumption of water is actually equitably distributed and applied to all users, everybody with a straw in the river. So if we can talk a little bit about where the water may come from and why it's such an important issue for Western Colorado. And frankly, who's at risk, right? Up on the screen, you'll see a pie chart created by something called the Water Bank Work Group, which is something the River District, Southwestern Water Conservation District, the state, Tri-County, the Nature Conservancy has been involved in for quite some time. The question is, where is the Colorado River water used in our state? Well, 1.3 million acre-feet of it is used in western slope agriculture. The east slope M&I, that purple piece of the pie, municipal use is about 360 thousand acre-feet a year. That purple piece is a piece of the pie that is growing. As more people move and as water is converted through, I think probably the best example is over at Colorado Big Thompson project. The CBT originally was primarily an agricultural diversion from the Colorado River into the Big Thompson, provided supplemental agricultural irrigation water for much of northeastern Colorado. Today, about 75% of the shares of the CBT are owned by Front Range municipalities. It's a growing number. Those shares have seen all-time high prices in their trading this year. The East Slope Ag still has a significant chunk there in the lime or green slice, and then we have a little red slice that is the West Slope municipal and industrial use. So what's at risk if we either go into a demand management program or if we just allow the hydrology and the overuse in the lower basin to drive us to a potential compact call? Well, what's at use is that big blue piece of the pie. What's at risk? So of that 1.3 million, approximately 1.1 million is pre-compact water. So the pre-compact water is technically not subject to call in the event of a curtailment. When the lower basin, when we're unable to deliver our 10-year rolling average, we run the risk of a call. And 1.1 million of that big blue piece is technically not available for the lower basin to curtail, for them to require us to curtail. So we would normally say, well, that's good, then our agriculture is secure. But our concern is that the hardened demand represented by the purple slice in this pie will drive the purchasing and the buying and drying of our western slope ag. And because those municipal and industrial uses are such high dollar uses that if something's not done to prevent it, we're going to see a significant buying program here on the western slope. That ag use, I don't probably need to tell many people in this audience, supports and provides the fabric of western Colorado. It enhances every community we have. It enhances our tourism. It enhances our recreational economy. It provides for our wildlife. It provides food. It provides economic support for the families and the industries that have been built up around the agriculture. It is essential to our way of life on the western slope. When we talk about reducing consumptive use, we have to be very, very careful about how those rules and how that program gets rolled out. The question is, and so this pie doesn't show it, but post-compact water rights in the Colorado River Basin are roughly split equally between the trans-basin diverters over to the Front Range and the western slope. So we have about a 50-50 share of the depletions. And remember, if it's the depletions that are causing us to violate our compact obligation, it's the depletions which should solve and prevent a call from ever coming on. So these junior water rights that are diverting significant amounts of water to the Front Range, along with our junior water rights on the west slope, are the ones that need to be willing to share in this demand management program, in the intentional reduced use. Now, if it's a voluntary and compensated and temporary program, which is what our board and the Southwestern Water Conservation District, our two boards have been very involved in discussions about this. Those elements, that voluntary and compensated type of program, demand management, where you pay someone to reduce their use, that payment could go to a pre-compact water user if it's a voluntary transaction, if the owner of that water right is willing to do so on a market-based transactional level. What we're opposed to is some form of mandatory uncompensated curtailment of water rights, whether it's pre or post compact. The idea being, let's solve this problem proactively. Let's go at it in a way that our communities can engage in this program and protect their interests at the same time. So how do we make sure this happens? How do we protect those interests? Well, as I said, our district, our staff has been involved in these discussions at a statewide level. We are aware that the Upper Colorado River Commission is engaged today in the negotiation of creating the basis for this demand management pool. And what we've been informed is that there's a series of documents that are going to be executed, possibly as soon as the end of this month, that are involved, that set up the Lower Basin Drought Contingency Plan, the Upper Basin Demand Management Plan, the Upper Basin Reservoir Reoperation, and then an umbrella agreement between all of the 7 states and the Secretary of Interior. And we have a very serious concern that we haven't seen the demand management document. We haven't seen what it is our Upper Colorado River Commissioner is potentially going to sign within the next month. Why is that a concern for us, and why should the West Slope be concerned? Well, one is this where the water comes from issue. But two is that there are 3 districts, 3 organizations in this state charged by statute with protecting Colorado's share of the Colorado River. There's the Colorado Water Conservation Board, a statewide entity, and they have that authority. There's also the Colorado River District here, based out of Glenwood Springs in our 15-county region. And there's the Southwest Water Conservation District. Those 3 entities have that obligation. Myself, Peter Fleming at the River District, Bruce Whitehead and Beth Van Verst down in the Southwest serve as advisors to the commissioner for the state of Colorado, the Upper Colorado River Commissioner. But we haven't seen those documents that are about to be executed. We've been told that we don't need to see them. We're not okay with that. We don't think it's acceptable. We think those documents need to be shared with us, and frankly, the impact of those documents need to be shared with the water users of the Western Slope and the state of Colorado. We are asking that the Colorado Water Conservation Board, who has a meeting next week and is discussing this, send a clear message to our commissioner that while they don't control his actions, they can influence his behavior. We want our members of the Colorado Water Conservation Board to tell our commissioner, share those documents. Get out there and be as transparent as Russ George pushed in the Colorado Water Plan. Keep the consistency in our community, in our state, with sharing and being transparent. Do not hide important documents and important facts from the water users in this state. We do best as a state when we work together and when we protect all of our interests, when we have an elevated and informed level of dialogue. Today, we don't have that. We ask the commissioner, James Eklund, to share the documents, to release them, and to make sure that we are able to give meaningful input, not 24 hours to review them before he executes them, not after he's agreed to every term and every word in the documents. So that's a very important issue. The other issue I want to touch on is that the staff at the CWCB has been doing a fantastic job in going out at the direction of their board and asking water users around the state to say, hey, what is it that a demand management program needs to protect? What is it that you need in this program if we're going to ever implement it? And it's the staff at the CWCB and the Attorney General's office who have been out probably in 15 different meetings, including with our district, the Southwest District, other public forums, many of which I've been at personally. And we appreciate that. And what we've heard from them time and time again is that the program, the demand management program, needs to be voluntary, it needs to be compensated, it needs to ensure that the benefits and burdens of such a program are shared equally statewide. These are the things we've heard. I want to say that the CWCB, well, we'll go back to that one in a minute. So the CWCB did a presentation. Their executive director and interstate chief did a presentation to the interim legislative committee, and this slide is from their presentation. I've got a few of them, and the key is just showing where the staff at the CWCB has been publicly stating what we believe is appropriate and why we support them in their actions. They say that it's going to be, when you talk about how you deal with, how you prevent a compact curtailment, it should be proactive, not reactive. It should be that planning process that produces our ability as an upper basin and our ability as a state to prevent the chaos of a compact call. So what do we need? Well, we want voluntary actions to conserve, and that's exactly what they told our legislature this summer. They said that they want to, that the resolution, now they were quoting from the UCRC resolutions from 2014 and 2018, that this demand management program and pool should be filled with temporary, voluntary, compensated water, not mandatorily curtailed water, but the water that people have produced through a market-based transaction. And they want to do this to help avoid the potential need for involuntary curtailment of Colorado River uses. We fully support that. Demand management considerations, this is another slide from the CWCB's presentation. And you can see right in there that sideboards and limitations, that it needs to be parity, there needs to be parity, benefits and burdens need to be shared across the state. We appreciate that. And that's where the public dialogue has been. Now, what we hear, the CWCB has gathered that information, the staff has gathered that information, and they filed a memo last week in preparation for the CWCB's board meeting this coming week. And actually, I think it was even this week that the memo was made public. And in that memo, frankly, we were concerned to hear about some of the input that they were receiving from other water users throughout the state. What they've said is that the water users have currently considered these and other issues as necessary sideboards to effectively protect and promote the interests of Colorado water users and communities throughout the state. And they identify key issues that are being currently included but are not limited to, and this is where it gets a little concerning for us. Whether the program would be limited to temporary, voluntary, and compensated, or be expanded to include something more. What is that expansion? Who is it that's calling for the expansion? It's not the West Slope, I can tell you that. We don't think it should be expanded into an involuntary, uncompensated mechanism of reducing water use. They say in the next bullet, whether the program would be used to help assure continued compliance with the Colorado River Compact or something more. So let's talk about that. The whole idea of a demand management pool is you produce it over several years and you put water into a non-equalized pool, and let's just say it's in Lake Powell because it seems like that's the most likely place. And it sits there until the Upper Colorado River Commission says, wow, we need to release this water to make sure we continue to comply with the compact. And that is something we and the staff at the CWCB have been very public about. The purpose of that pool is to avoid a compact call, compact curtailment, to make sure we are in compliance. It's consistent with the language from the 1948 compact that Eric Kuhn had up on the slide earlier. What is something more? What is that? Well, I can tell you what I think that is from some of the operators of the TMDs on the Front Range, the Trans Mountain Diverters. I believe what they're talking about is they want to set up individual accounts in Lake Powell inside of this demand management pool that they can use after a compact call comes on. So they can protect their own diversions while the West Slope gets shut off. They want to not act for the benefit of the entire state, not act for the benefit of the entire Upper Basin, but act for the individual benefit of their projects or their consumers. Now remember, 3 agencies, the Southwest Water Conservation District, the River District, and the CWCB have an obligation to the entire state, not just to their projects. So this is something that's really concerning and should be concerning for everyone on the West Slope and in the state government. Additionally, from this same memo, they heard from other water users that rules for compact administration before that they'll go with the voluntary program before considering a pivot from the temporary and voluntary compensated demand management to something more akin to mandatory curtailment. So these are major water users in the state of Colorado that are saying you need to be ready to, quote, pivot, even though it has never, ever been vetted publicly. Hasn't been discussed at the roundtables on the West Slope. It hasn't been discussed at the roundtables on the East Slope because we go to their meetings, we listen to what's going on. It is a completely new element to filling this demand management pool. And it's one that needs to see the light of day, and we need to understand it before our state signs those demand management documents. So what is it that the River District wants to see the CWCB agree to? It's very, very similar and very supportive of the CWCB staff. So we want their board members to publicly commit along with the state engineer, to these principles that, and a couple, the first two are really basin-wide principles, right? That the pool in Powell will be free of charge for the benefit of the upper basin and used solely for the purposes of avoiding a compact violation. Two, that this pool will not be subject to equalization or balancing releases from Lake Powell, right? Very simple, very much in the interest of everybody in the upper basin. Three, it will be filled with voluntary, temporary, and compensated water. And it must reflect a proportionate contributions from each upper division state. Meaning, for the folks from Utah and Wyoming here today, we would like you to contribute to the extent that you're depleting the river similar proportionate amounts to the upper basin demand management pool. Four, we think it should be done in a way that causes no injury to other water rights in the state. So if someone is voluntarily curtailing their own use, their curtailment should not impact any other senior or junior water rights. Just as if you're going through a change case in a water court, when you're curtailing your water under a demand management program, you should not be injuring other water users because you're going to receive compensation. It doesn't give you the right to injure other people. Five, no disproportionate impacts to any single basin or region within Colorado. I've heard it said that the program, the demand management program, should just be set up on a free market system. Well, a free market system, and the people that advocate for that are those that sell their water at $60,000 an acre foot for firm yield over on the Front Range. And that means we're not going to give up any water because we know our water sells for a higher value. All of the water for a demand management program should come off the west slope. That's what we hear when we hear that. And what we're saying is we agree it should be a market-based approach, but it should be a guided market with sideboards to assure that that water being produced is in the same proportionality as the water uses that have gotten us to the compact violation or are getting us close to that violation. Okay? So that's why we say it will come from water rights on both sides of the Continental Divide in amounts that are roughly proportionate to those two regions' post-compact depletions. Six, it must be consistent with Principle 4 of the conceptual framework of the state water plan. And again, I want to stress, we are asking for a continuation of the open, transparent dialogue and the agreements that were reached in that water plan. Russell George held that thick document up here, and contained within that is this Principle 4. And this Principle 4 truly says if we need a safety pool, we need a program that protects against involuntary curtailment. So it protects against the things that those other water users are asking the state to implement, right? And that it's for protection for existing uses, right? It's not going to be used. We're not going to curtail our uses on the west slope and send demand management water down to Lake Powell, only to have another trans-mountain diversion come in and suck water to the east slope. That's what Principle 4 says, and that's what the state agreed to when it agreed to the state water plan. We're saying that needs to be upheld. And 7, and finally, we would ask that the CWCB board and the state engineer support their staff and support our district and the southwestern district's outreach programs that have come to these conclusions. We want a public statement in the form that can be relied upon by everybody here through a resolution of the CWCB and action of the state engineer that they are committing to these principles. And we want that to commit, to agree to not to change, not to move. And I have to say, I mean, hydrology controls what happens in this river. So does overuse, but let's just say that the overuse actually gets under control down there. The hydrology is still predicted to be bad. And if we have the worst case hydrology, it is possible that our state may need to move to a involuntary system. But we want that done through a public process. We want the stakeholders at the table. We want our districts who are charged with protecting the state's interests. They're at the table with the CWCB and all of the water users who will be impacted. We want an open dialogue, not a secretive dialogue. We want it to be vetted like the state water plan. So this demand management presents an opportunity and one that we fully support, and I want to be clear about it. We just need these protections. And the protections we're talking about, those 6 principles, are nowhere near as detailed as the final program that would need to be rolled out. So we understand that. We're not addressing every single possible concern that our water users will have. That will have to be done in the form of a rulemaking, most likely by the state engineer and the CWCB as they create the rules for this program. But we want these principles adhered to while doing this. We have to say that while these are risky times on the Colorado River, and we must stand together as a state and find solutions which leave no region of the state behind. We must engage in an informed and open and honest solution-oriented process which protects the entire state of Colorado. No matter how good it sounds or how well-intentioned it is, we must not allow, as water users, the development of a demand management program which leads to the buying and drying of the western slope for the benefits of junior trans-mountain diverters. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much. My name is John Whitehead. I'm from Moab. Alan, correct?
Andy.
Andy. So, I'm sorry.
No problem, Jim. I mean, John.
Touche. So do you think a water plant, I'm sorry, what you guys did for Colorado, you had these watershed meetings, and I'm also thinking about what our keynote speaker said. I think he would be in agreement with you, but it sounds like it's time for an upper basin water plan, is much that models what the state of Colorado is doing or has done. Would you agree?
John, I would agree, certainly, and I think that one of the tenets of the Colorado River District that we're very big supporters of is, and our risk study is really an example of that, is creating the data and engaging in dialogue that raises the water intellect of the public and bringing the dialogue and the discussion up so that we can intelligently engage in open dialogue and find solutions. And I think what you probably heard from me today is we don't think that should be done behind closed doors. We think it should be done in an open setting, similar to our roundtables that Russ George created and talked about, similar to the way our water plan was developed. We want that open public dialogue, and I think on a basin-wide scale, we're absolutely in favor of it, because we're all at the same risk.
Andy, can you go back to the slide that you said you were going to go back to?
Sure. I didn't go back to that. And part of it was I was watching some time cards, and I tend to talk too long. This one. This is what we're trying to avoid, all right? So this is the key is it's avoiding a compact call, avoiding the upper basin falling into a situation where we are in violation of the compact. Because what happens at that point in time is great economic uncertainty. Uncertainty with respect to who has to cut water off, how those rules are administered. We get interstate fighting because folks from Wyoming and Utah are going to tell Colorado that we've been overusing our water, our share of the water. We're going to deny that, but they're going to tell us that. We're going to fight about it. You know, we're going to get fights between the lower basin and the upper basin because we're going to say we're not in violation because we've released the other water, or they didn't count for it right. We're going to fight within our state if that compact call comes up. We're going to have the east slope trying to take more and the west slope trying to take more, and this collaborative spirit that Russ George talks about is going to disappear, and this scene's going to occur. And so I'd rather go back to the rainbow than than this one. But
hi there. Thanks for the presentation. I know Arizona had a public meeting for their stakeholders going over the details of their DCP. And I was wondering if there's any indication from the commission that once the commissioners do finalize the details of the demand management plan, if there'll be a similar kind of rollout for the public and like sufficient time for a public comment period. Thank you.
What we understand, and the reason there's some pressure on the Upper Colorado River Commission, is that the lower basin believes they'll be ready for this federal legislation that they need for their DCP sometime around the end of this year. And the upper basin says, you know, if they're going to have legislation, we should hop on board and we should be ready to do that at the same time. So I don't believe there's actually sufficient time to engage in a process, a public vetting process, if those documents are in the process of being finalized shortly. And I'd really like to see that public vetting process occur before the documents are agreed to so that the substance of the documents can be vetted.
Andy, this is Kirsten. I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation. How can this group support the River District in reaching James Eklund? Should we be talking just to the CWCB? Should we be reaching out to the governor? To take advantage of the energy you have in this room, what should the water users be doing?
I would encourage, I want to say this about James. I like James. I think he's a very intelligent, smart man. He has Western Slope roots, so anybody in this room who connects with him on his family's ranch, we would encourage you to talk to him. He was appointed by the governor. He answers to the governor. Anybody with connections and ability to talk to Governor Hickenlooper and explain the lack of transparency, that's what we would like. And we have to say, Governor Hickenlooper has pushed, similar to the River District, for open, transparent negotiations. Back when he was mayor, he operated the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement. He appointed a board at Denver Water who engaged with the West Slope and created some great solutions. He's done that with the state water plan as governor. We want him to hear that we want him and his representatives to continue to operate that way. So anybody who can do that, we would appreciate it.
Hi, I was just wondering if there had been any thought about sort of what the funding mechanism for the demand management program might be, particularly in light of the fact that the River District wants to keep the pool, the demand management pool, as something that would benefit the entire upper basin rather than particular water users.
Sure. We would look at the funding coming from potentially a number of different sources. There are discussions at the Interbasin Compact Committee, which is part of Russ George's brainchild. There are discussions among civic leaders throughout the state about funding the state water plan, and within that, demand management is a large part of that discussion. And so there are different funding options being discussed in terms of how that might work or might be. So I don't think, I've heard a number of different options. I don't think any of them are fully vetted enough at this point, or that there are proponents of one particular funding mechanism over another. It may be fees on water users, so by tap. So someone who takes water, their tap uses water out of the Colorado River. There may be a fee associated with that within our state, or possibly, frankly, within the entire basin, because I want to point out that I think this upper basin demand management pool, while non-equalized and under upper basin control, also benefits the lower basin. Specifically because any water that goes down in the pool isn't something that we're going to draw back up here into Colorado. It is going to go downstream and be used by the lower basin at the right time. And when that happens, the lower basin benefits. They benefit from the lack of chaos of a call as well. So we think basin-wide funding, we think federal funding, we think statewide funding, and that may mean, unfortunately, some form of new fee or tax. And the other option, or a combination of, is that we have a number of NGOs in the basin that are operating and are very concerned about how things are playing out on this river, using some of their funding either as bridge funding until we stand up a more publicly funded process. Something along those lines is what we're looking at. And I'll tell you, I'm probably the most optimistic person in any room that we're actually going to get that funding. But we're going to commit to working very hard to do that. So. All right, thank you.